What's happening, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, the Jessica I of Giving It a Try, E for effort, Jack Slack. Fights Gone By podcast, episode 143, coming at you on a miserable rainy day, but we got a banger of a card coming up this weekend, and it's the weirdest kind of card because the top end of it is the bit you barely give a shit about. We're going to peak pretty early in main card terms. With the People's Main Event, which they're advertising as the People's Main Event, having booked it as not the main event. So they know what they're doing. But at any rate, I've been working like a madman this week, embracing full independent writing. So if you want to keep up with any of the shit that I've done, we did a podcast Monday, we did a Filthy Casuals Guide to Henry Cejudo on Tuesday, which is when you should have got your bets in on Marlon Moraes. We did a Cejudo versus Moraes article, and then we did a Ferguson versus Cerrone article for the Patreon boys, and today we're doing another podcast. So I've done 5 things this week, which is quite a lot for me, so don't let me hear you say, Jack, you're slacking, or whatever clever comment you think you've made. Go and check all of that out. It's all gold, except the last bit, which is what I'm doing right now, so you're currently checking it out, but check all that other shit out afterwards. So let's do some news. Fight announcements, you got Big Ben Rothwell returning to fight Andrei Arlovski for a second time. I think we might have touched on that last week, actually, but I've got it down here anyway, as if I didn't. Fair enough, it's Arlovski at this point, who cares? We talked about Alexander Gustafsson retiring last week, but I don't know if we touched on Jimmy Manuwa, because I think that came out later in the week, and I completely skipped over King Mo, because that's what I've done with all his fights lately. But that's 2 more retirements in the top 20 of the light heavyweight division worldwide. So this division, it's getting bad. I mean, people were complaining that John Jones was just mopping up old men before, and then the new crop are now old men and retiring. So it's just, that division has never really gotten good again. For a while in like 2007, 2008, that was the hottest division on earth. And then with increased weight cutting, people went down to middleweight, people got old, drug testing came in, all sorts of things just ruined it. I mean, obviously not drug testing for Bellator, but good on King Mo for getting out before they booked him into the inevitable rematch with Mousasi, because they're desperate for people for Mousasi to fight, and they really want him to beat old dudes that he's got a loss to, like the ghost of Machida. So good on King Mo. And then Jimmy Manuwa had 3 rough losses back-to-back, and he's been getting cracked on the chin pretty hard each time. Jimmy Manuwa is an amazing story generally. Like I think it was powerlifting he was into, and he hadn't tried any martial arts until he was 27. So yeah, to come in and win whatever it was, 11 back-to-back, all by knockout or something like that, and then get to the UFC and look good there. He was top 10 talent, and I said the other day that he looked terrifying until people bit down on their mouth guards and ran at him. And someone was like, when does he look terrifying? And I was like, do you remember the Ovin St. Preux fight? Because he looked fucking terrifying in that. Monstrous hitter, but just never really got his defense in order, and was a little bit shakeable. But spectacular athlete, and I'm sure he could go back to powerlifting and just do that into a second retirement. A couple of other good fight announcements that aren't involving heavyweights. Islam Makhachev versus Davi Ramos. That one has got me salivating. Islamivating, if you will. Islam Makhachev, obviously, just off that brilliant fight on the St. Petersburg card, but has been killing dudes for a while, and people have been complaining that he's not getting like a top 15, top 10 guy. Well, top 10 would be a bit abrupt, but complaining that he's not getting a top 10 guy. In this fight announcement, that is what you're getting. You're not getting against a top 15 guy, but Davi Ramos is also awesome in his own right. It's one of those divisions that's absolutely stacked, and you've got great matchups like this that maybe result in one of them getting into the rankings, but it's going to upset some people. But if you look at the quality of the fight there, and the styles, you got Davi Ramos Jiu-Jitsu tank versus Islam Makhachev Sambo monster. What's not to like, mate? Another interesting one that was signed recently, John Lineker versus Rob Font 2. That's on the UFC Grenville card. I barely remembered that they fought the first time. Rob Font's really come along a long way since. Some great font puns on the fight announcement. Someone was saying Rob Font needs to maintain the space, perhaps even a double space. Typography humour. That's when you know you're getting lame. But Lineker obviously coming off that fight with Corey Sandhagen, who is so hot now. I was on him before he was cool, just so you know. That was a good fight for him. He lost, and Sandhagen was doing all the right things, but Lineker even, he showed counterpunching that he doesn't normally show. He didn't just lumber forward, and he hit some nice takedowns too, threatened with the guillotine right at the end, or was that the end of the second round, but had Corey Sandhagen spurting blood upwards out of his nose in this guillotine. I thought he looked really good in that fight. He was complaining that Sean Shelby hadn't been giving him enough matches, but I think he's dropped out or been ill or something for a couple of recent ones that he's had booked. So, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other there, but that's a good fight. Can't wait for that. Other news, Beck Rawlins is making noise about returning to Bellator. This was hilarious because someone sent it to me 10 minutes after I made a joke about how someone was saying that Bellator is no longer really the UFC's top competition. ONE FC is, and I said Bellator is really more in competition with Bare Knuckle FC for fighters who used to be good and have now retired. But, immediately after Beck Rawlins goes to Bellator, hilarious. Oh, that was in answer to ONE FC saying that they're opening offices in the US. I couldn't verify this because Chatri has now blocked me, but I did see Victor Chu, who is one of their VPs. I don't know what VP means in this sense because Misha Tate is a vice president of ONE. They just give it out to everyone. But he slid into my follows. I think one of them offered me a job a while ago when it was the first time that Fightland shut down. They were like, come and write for Evolve, and I just sort of ignored it. And since then, I've just been shitting on ONE every week. But there's some good guys over there. They love the martial art. The fights are amazing. It's just that Chatri has taken the American attitude of you've got to sell yourself and just cranked it up to infinity, and lies all the time. So the current lie is that the current stretch of the truth is that they're aggressively hiring to open offices in the US. They could well be, but my response to this was just like, when's the esports league starting? Because they announced that like a year ago and haven't done anything about it. They just... Every week there is a new massive announcement from ONE, and they don't really ever follow up on it because they know they've got a mate who writes for Forbes, and he'll just write any old shit that they give him. And it gets attention, and then the idiots who want to believe are like, yep, ONE's taken over, and no one ever says, at what point are they going to start worrying about earning back some money? You can't expand infinitely, even if you're in Singapore, and people are just trying to get rid of money. But that's ONE Watch. We've done ONE Watch for this week. So they have an event coming up next week. I don't think they got anything on this week. It's serious, that is. I mean, they name all their events. Actually, they do have like a ONE Hero series or something like that now, which I appreciate. It's like when Strikeforce had Contenders. You do a lesser series, so I know which ones I'm allowed to skip. What other news do we got? Oh, Todd Duffy signed with Ali Abdulaziz's Dominance MMA or whatever they are. So expect him in a title shot soon. Unfortunately, even at heavyweight, you do have to win one fight to get a title shot. So we'll see if Duffman does that. I thought he was retired. And then the final piece of news, which I say because I like this one, it's another match announcement just came out. Nordin Taleb versus Muslim Salikov. A lot of people don't really know who Muslim Salikov is. A couple of people will be hot on Taleb from his most recent performance in the Canada card. That Canada card wasn't especially strong, but he was a strong performer on it. But what I like about this is that Nordin Taleb has really been strengthening his kicking game lately, really looking hot with the double attack, the low kick, middle kick, high kick. And Muslim Salikov, if you don't know him, he was a Sanshao guy, and he was a very, very good Sanshao guy. I can't remember what the guy's name is, Lee something or other. Fought Kung Lee back in the day, but he was like the Chinese champion. And after his fight with Kung Lee, he was champion for ages, and then Muslim Salikov came in and beat him. And Muslim Salikov was very good at Sanshao. Very sort of slow transition to MMA. I think he fought like twice in the first 3 years he was doing MMA. But has really gone back to it, and after knocking out Melvin Gillard with a hook kick on a Kunlun fight card back in 2017, got into the UFC, lost his first match to Alex Garcia, won by KO against Rick Rainey on that Poirier versus Gaethje card in 2018. But good kicking game and good at throwing people off kicks, which is, a huge part of Sanshao. So look forward to that, because to be honest, it could turn into like cage stalling or Nordin Taleb trying to box because he doesn't want to throw kicks, or it could turn into like Boakar versus Li Yong, where Li Yong broke out some awesome Sanshao trips that you don't really see in like Muay Thai. So for that reason, I think that sounds like good fun, and any more of Muslim Salikov is good because he's not done much in the UFC yet, except do a cool KO on a guy and lose a fight. So excited for that. Right, let's get into the previews of what's happening this week. And by what's happening this week, I mean there's one card on. Bellator's not doing anything, One's not doing anything, Ryzen's not doing anything. They're the ones we usually cover unless we're really desperate and then we talk about Cyril Gane and how great he is. Cyril Gane coming to the UFC, by the way. They just announced that he's fighting some other unknown heavyweight. So let's look at this card anyway. Bottom of the card, we've got Caitlin Chookagian versus Joanne Calderwood. I just got done watching Jessica Eye versus Caitlin Chookagian. Really struggling to say this lass's name. Caitlin could have won that fight. It was pretty bad all round, though. I suppose at least you got in this fight two people who are going to, they've both got that rangy kickboxing style. And Calderwood genuinely, when she triangled that lass, I was like, people were saying, oh, she's improved so much on the ground. And I was saying, it can't be that much that she's just, gone from not great on the ground to, oh, you can't take her down now because she'll triangle you. But she looked pretty good in her in her most recent one against Ariane Lipski. Getting more solid all round. I mean, she got guillotined by Andrade pretty quick back in 2016 and then lost that fight to Cynthia Carvalho. But, looking at her record, it's checkered, but it's not as bad as I seem to remember it being, there was the loss to Marina, what's her name, Moroz, by the armbar, which was a shocker. But I think people just, there was a lot of hype on her because she's lovely and has an amazing accent. And, can be pretty interesting as a striker. But it was like, throw your cool kick, get taken down immediately. Uh-oh. So I think really focusing on the jiu-jitsu has really helped her. And is probably what she should have been doing more than anything because the striking was very solid. But when you're worrying about being taken down, the holes appear in your striking even without you thinking about them. You're worrying about someone getting a clinch on you or picking up your leg or whatever. You don't throw the strikes like you would have done in a kickboxing match, which you'll never do it with that confidence anyway in MMA. But by being more confident on the ground, confidence alone, even without the actual being able to win fights on the ground, if you think you can win fights on the ground, it's going to help your striking output a lot more on the feet. So, I'll be watching that. Caitlin Chookagian has a mercilessly boring kickboxing style, but when Calderwood's actually kickboxing well, like against Seohye Ham, I love Ham delay. I've got back into her. I watched her most recent fights the other day because I'd forgotten that what had happened to her. She's gone and become the best atomweight in the world. But, Calderwood looked pretty sharp there, and she can be good fun. On the subject of atomweights, we were talking about those two atomweight fights at Ryzen the other day. Atomweight's a weird one because, Michelle Waterson was the best atomweight in the world for a while, and she's gone up to strawweight basically because that's the difference between the pay in the UFC and Invicta or wherever else. You're not going to get the money. So you're fighting at this big disadvantage, and you're just choosing to get these wins and losses rather than be the best in the world at a division that no one's really watching and you won't get paid for. It's a weird choice for the women to have to make. We don't really have that as much with men now. There are some men's strawweights in the world, but there's not an awful lot of them. It's not like when the UFC thought that lightweight wasn't interesting enough, and dudes were, there were these killers in gyms who are lightweights now are normal-sized people. Donald Cerrone, people like that, they get up to 190 between fights. But the UFC is nah, people don't want to see anyone below 200 pounds. That's Mark Ripato's wisdom. The adult male weighs 200 pounds. Then you got Eddie Wineland versus Grigory Popov. That is a fucking amazing name. Grigory Popov. That's an ancillary character from the Brothers Karamazov, that dude sounds like. Popov on a long streak of wins. His last fight was on something called WLF Wars, and I read MILF Wars. But low kicks finish, go flata finish. This guy looks exciting, and he hasn't lost since 2014. It could be setting up to be murdered by Eddie Wineland. But Eddie Wineland, how's he been doing lately? Because we were really hot on him for a while. I was very hot on him for a long time. Went up and, he laid the blueprint for beating Henan Barao. People didn't believe me when I said that the first time, but the Killing the King Henan Barao article involved a lot of Wineland. And then TJ Dillashaw came out and used the same stuff to beat Henan Barao. Eddie Wineland, just by doing weird movie, herky-jerky feinting stuff, had Barao swinging at air and doing nothing. And then he ducked onto a back kick that was aimed at his body but hit him in the face because he was ducking. It was a very, not fluky knockout, but very peculiar. It was like Masasi versus Uriah Hall, just what are the chances of his head being in that position when you were trying to kick him in the body? Since that Henan Barao fight, he beat Yves Jaboin. God, what happened to Yves Jaboin? I'm going to be careful because it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole on these episodes and just get distracted talking about Yves Jaboyne and his amazing spinning shit and looking through his recent record. But, he beat Yves Jaboyne, had a couple of losses. Johnny Eduardo starched him badly. Brian Caraway won a couple, lost a couple, and we're back here. He just lost to John Dodson. Jesus Christ. I'm not surprised I can't remember that fight because I actively avoid watching John Dodson fights now. But the Alejandro Perez fight he lost in 2018. So really he needs to get one back in the win column. So why not a debuting guy with a crazy record? And none of us know how good he is or not because he's been fighting on MILF wars and go-go plattering jobbers. But he could be amazing, could not. So don't really know what to tell you to look for in that fight, but it should be fun. Actually, on the subject of Eddie Wineland, he sometimes likes to vertical fist his jab, which is a sort of old school thing, but De La Hoya did it against Mayweather, and then Mayweather did it in his next fight. It's just Eddie Alvarez used to do this too. He'd keep his hands exactly as they were, not twist them at all, and throw them straight out. And if you watch the Cerrone Iaquinta fight, so he's throwing a lot of jabs, and some of them are going in vertical fist. He's just putting his hand there and then just straightening his arm so that he's not telegraphing it at all. Which sort of links in with an old Jersey Joe Walcott feint, which is he'd have his right hand in position ready to throw, and then he'd turn his thumb side inwards, just twist the wrist, and a little shoulder feint, and guys would think the right straight was coming because they saw the turn of the hand. One you can play with. But anyway, we're getting distracted. You listen to these podcasts for me getting distracted. Bevan Lewis versus Darren Stewart. I've heard good things about Bevan Lewis, but I haven't really seen much of him, so I'm looking forward to that. Yan Xiaonan or Xiaonan Yan versus Angela Hill. That'll be a good one. I always enjoy Angela Hill fight. We should be honest, there's a lot of women on this card, and I think it's a good time to talk about something that someone asked me this week. Someone was like, you disparage women's MMA a lot, blah, 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 because we were doing the meme thing where people asked me to talk about Valentina Shevchenko on Reddit, and I was like, I just don't care. Someone was like, disparaging of women's MMA, blah, 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 blah. I think the worst thing you can do is lower all your standards for technical and tactical stuff. I understand that there are proportional strength differences, a difference in explosivity, difference in knockout power between men and women. But I think if you start lowering your technical and tactical and strategic standards and then tacking on for a woman at the end, I think that's really bad. That's more sexist than just saying women's MMA generally is not in a great state. Because when I do talk positively about things that various WMMA fighters are doing, I love Angela Hill's style of feinting and moving. When I talk about things that Valentina Shevchenko, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, people like that do well, I'm talking about doing them well generally. I'm not saying for a woman. When I was writing a piece about, it was when Joanna had just handled 3 hardcore pressure fighters in a row, Andrade, Kowalkiewicz, and Gedalia. And I was saying, look, anyone can learn from watching this woman diffuse pressure and circle out. There are there's probably 15 dudes in the UFC who do this well now, and Jędrzejczyk's doing it as well as any of them, maybe better. Looking at Jessica Ai winning fights by throwing overhand hammer fist with her right hand and then leaving her chin out on a platter and getting hit in the face but it not mattering because her opponent doesn't hit hard enough to hurt her, that, if I was going, well, she's put together 4 impressive victories on the trot here, blah, 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 her striking's improved, blah, blah, it would be just bollocks, So I appreciate that people are like, women will only get better if we hype up that side of the sport. No, women will only get better if they're allowed time to compete there, which they have. They're all contractually in the UFC. We're watching the fights. We don't need to lie about the quality of it. So I posit that you, sir, you who asked me that, are the sexist. No one's sexist. It's not sexist to think that one side of the sport is objectively worse. Because if you know what you're watching, and you're watching Jessica Ai get a title shot based on winging rubbish punches with her chin up in the air, you know it's bad. And if you know what you're watching, when you watch, Rose Namajunas working against Jessica Andrade the other week, that was good. But anyway, Xiaonan Yan versus Angela Hill. Xiaonan Yan is the lass who always opens with, a hook kick or a side kick, and they use that in the hype package, and then she does it, and then she moves into a much more boring style where she just throws 1-2s after that. I believe that's her. Yeah, I think that's her. It's really weird. But how many she won in the UFC now? 3 on the trot. She came over from Road, which is where my girl Hamdallay's fighting. Angela Hill, obviously a bit more hit and miss with her record, but went back to Invicta and was just smoking lasses, and it was pretty clear that she was a level above that. Her difficulties have always come in the grappling. You know, she did well on the feet against people like Rose Namajunas, who was getting pretty good on the feet at that point. And then Rose Namajunas did her favourite trip, which I meant to put in a Filthy Casuals guide, but I don't think I ever did a Filthy Casuals guide for her. But she throws an overhand right and then falls into an outside trip on the same side. So it's right hand, right leg. It's very spazzy, but it works. And she kept trying to do it to Joanna in their rematch, and then she did it in the 5th round and got that takedown. Because spazzy as it is, if you forget about it, it's going to work. So Angie Hill versus Yan An Yan. I think that'll be interesting. I think Hill has to get to her kicks early and often, because she uses them well and then sort of gets away from them when she's a little bit worried about the clinch and stuff. Really like her intercepting knees, but again, the problem with the intercepting knees is that you put yourself in a clinch. Even if you're putting yourself in a clinch, having knocked the wind out of them, you're still putting yourself in the clinch, so it can be a little bit worrying. She does a good a step-up left leg kick, but I really like it when she's focusing on her long right low kick, because you can get your foot back behind you a little bit quicker. You don't have to step right up onto the opponent to kick him. And of course, the overhand is her specialty. So if the 1-2 is coming like clockwork, she'll know to time the right hand. For Yan An Yan, do something that's not the 1-2. Throw a couple of feints. I hope that's Yan An Yan I'm thinking of, because there's a couple of Chinese lasses in the UFC, and I could just be being a massive racist. Let's move on to fights that are a little bit more... God, this card is actually pretty fucking banging. Ricardo Lamas versus Calvin Kattar. You see, this could be on a fight night a fight night main card. Ricardo Lamas versus Calvin Kattar. Kattar obviously was on top of the world, the Boston finisher. He's the Boston finisher, despite getting like 10 decisions back to back before he came into the UFC. But he was on a good streak because he came into the UFC on like some ridiculous winning streak of like 8. Beat Andre Fili by decision. Fought Shane Burgos in a great little scrap and actually knocked him out. That was 2018, and that was his first finish since 2010. So that'll tell you something. But he then fought Renato Moicano, and Moicano really found his number very quickly. It was very strange. Joe Rogan was saying, like, this guy trains at a top-level kickboxing gym, one of the best kickboxing gyms in America. Why is he struggling so much to check the low kicks? Moicano was timing him very well. He's catching him coming in. And by the end of it, you saw Kattar doing that kind of like trying to punch and reach, but without putting his foot in first. And it's almost impossible to do. So he's like falling over himself trying to do it. But he bounced back and stopped Chris Fishgold. Was that Fishgold's MMA? Not MMA. Jesus. He's not Michael Page, Jack. That was Chris Fishgold's UFC debut, not MMA debut. And he stopped him in the first round. So back on being the Boston finisher. 2 finishes since 2010. About level with Jeremy Stevens there for finishing. Ricardo Lamas, always been sort of like a top 10 sort of guy, maybe top 15. Well, what is he now? Tabology has him as 11 worldwide, but they might be ranking Pitbull or someone like that above him. So probably top 10 in the UFC. But he had the loss to Josh Emmett, which was a sort of odd one, because that was... Emmett came in, I think it was short notice. Yeah, he lost a fight with Aldo. I forgot that was even scheduled. A rematch with Aldo. And they rebooked Aldo and brought Josh Emmett in at short notice. Emmett missed weight, I believe, and then just starched Lamas. So he had a real change-up of style and opponent, and then also a very heavy opponent. So that was a rough one. But then he had that fight with Mirsad Bektik. And if you like your MMA grappling, that is a really good fight, because Mirsad Bektik is a smothering top player. You just watch him batter Darren Elkins. But Ricardo Lamas has a very interesting system of getting up. He will give up the closed guard or whatever, or the half guard, to put half guard in, or put in like the knee shield on the wrong leg. So basically he has like one leg outside the opponent's thigh, and then he has a butterfly hook in, but with the knee out on the same side as his other leg. It's like a shitty butterfly guard. Well, Gary Tonin uses that sort of butterfly hook to recover guard quite a lot, but he gets that, and he starts standing up with the foot that's the butterfly hook. He starts like going to do a technical stand-up or whatever, and the opponent will drive back into him, and he'll wrap the head so that he can look for a guillotine or whatever. And if they like drive their head into the hole or start trying to fight his hands, he can then use that single hook and a foot on the floor to lift them up. And he's hit a few of these like single butterfly hook on the wrong side sweeps with the front headlock, and it's very cool. He did sweep Bektik, and he did He did it to Elkins too, swept him, but he also almost guillotined Elkins off the same thing. And it's very similar to the sort of way that Cub Swanson uses like a single hook butterfly guard. But Swanson did that against Ricardo Lamas, and Lamas arm triangled him as he stood up. It was very cool. But yeah, I'm super hot on Lamas because of that. And his striking used to be just like low kick and then wheel kick. He was one of the first guys using the low kick, in fairness, but it used to be just that and a wheel kick. But he's actually getting pretty good on the feet now. I don't know, he's turned face for me in like the last few years. I didn't really care about him before, and now I'm quite keen on watching him fight. Very strong takedown artist, though. So that's a real question that Calvin Kattar hasn't faced as much. I mean, he stopped Chris Fishgold in the first round, and Chris Fishgold's mainly a grappler. But looking at his record before that, Shane Burgos really more of a striker. Yeah, no like big takedown artists sticking out from that record for me. Plus, Ricardo Lamas is going to try and kick you in the leg, so that'll be interesting at least. Low-key, possible fight of the night there. Just saying it. Low-key also could be just Ricardo Lamas cage humping him. Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Alexa Grasso. Kowalkiewicz is on a couple of losses now, having got sparked. Like one of the few one-punch knockouts you'll see in certainly Strawweight. Got laid out by Jessica Andrade. Then lost a decision to Michelle Waterson, who's really an atomweight. And even before that, her last win was like a split decision over Felice Herrig. But Alexa Grasso has also just like dropped off a cliff. She had an amazing fight with Inoue back in Invicta and came sort of out of nowhere. And everyone was like, this girl's cute and boxing really well against a lass who is known for her kickboxing. Mizuki Inoue. Beat Jodie Esquibel in Invicta, and I think she's now in the UFC, isn't she? But came in on her UFC debut against Heather Clark. Heather Clark, not a terrific fighter, but I thought that Alexa Grasso didn't look good there. Kept backing herself onto the fence and getting held there for long periods of time, trying to punch with her back to the fence and stuff. Lost a fight to Felice Herrig. Got a split decision over Randa Marcus, lost a fight to Tatiana Suarez, and the Suarez one, she was just nuked. And looking at that Suarez fight, I was watching it the other day because I was trying to remind myself of Tatiana Suarez's fights, but she was dwarfed by Suarez. Suarez is a big fucking strawweight, and she just couldn't do anything. It was that she gets put on the fence anyway because of her footwork and where she chooses to bang, but Tatiana Suarez just pushed her to the fence and was like, right, that's the end of the fight for you, mate. And Grasso just got nothing going from then on. There was not really even a struggle. It was just like slowly down on the back choke. And that's part of why everyone's so hot on Tatiana Suarez, but we'll get on to her later. So really what you got here is a couple of people who are known as like top flight strikers, but really haven't been able to showcase it very well in the UFC. Kowalkiewicz really isn't a top technical striker. What I've seen from Grasso when she's on has been better, I would say, but Kowalkiewicz is scrappy as fuck, and her clinch work is also really surprisingly good. She beat the shit out of Rose in the clinch. Maybe give her the edge, because Grasso does get drawn into clinches and put on the fence a lot, if Kowalkiewicz can, utilise the clinch striking more. Kowalkiewicz's kickboxing out in the open is basically inside low kick and 1-2s, and the 2 is always sort of loopy, and she just sort of leaves her chin out there, and sometimes she's like looking at the ground when she's punching and stuff. I don't know, maybe this is the sort of fight where Alexa Grasso comes out and puts on like a boxing clinic, and we all go, oh my god, I forgot, Alexa Grasso is actually pretty good at striking. Could be a garbage tier wrestling match. Tai Tuivasa versus Blagoy Ivanov. Tai Tuivasa lost his fight to JDS, so basically he gets Mr. Tune-Up 2019. Blagoy Ivanov lost his fight to Ben Rothwell, but was gifted a judge's decision. This guy is just so unbelievably boring. But then he's sort of like a veteran. He could just out-condition Tuivasa, or he could stick to him in wrestling. He did beat Fedor in Sambo in like 2008. I'll have you know. Do we have to talk about this one? I don't think anyone gives a fuck. Tai Tuivasa, throw some elbows, throw some low kicks. Don't just swing at this dude's head. Jimmy Rivera versus Petr Yan. Now we're talking, baby. Jimmy Rivera's in a weird spot because he's coming off a loss to Aljamain Sterling, where Aljamain Sterling sort of surprised us, because Jimmy Rivera was up there with Rafael Assunção as just sort of like the awkward spoiler of the division, which is why it's so impressive that Marlon Moraes went through both back-to-back, because nobody wanted to fight them, and they definitely didn't want to put them into title shots, so it was like, we've got this logger jam in the division, we're just going to keep running back Team Alpha Male beef while we wait for someone exciting to come along. And then, lo and behold, Marlon Moraes ascended from the heavenly pool, the USADA pool, But got that win over John Dodson in between. This is Jimmy Rivera, rather. He's a weird kind of guy, because he's been dropped a lot. Like, if you've watched Jimmy Rivera's fights, he has been stunned a few times, but he's also quite difficult to... It's odd. He's difficult to hit, but not. He's difficult to get your game working against, is what I'd say. Not infallible defensively, but tricky. Lots of inside kicks, lots of jabs and shit. You know, he's just a weird, awkward striker in the same way. Well, not in the same way that Rafael Sunsao does, because he's a little bit more active than a Sunsao. But tectonic drift is a little bit more active than a Sunsao. The reason we're here is because we love Petr Yan, and Petr Yan's getting put in with a spoiler and could be made to look bad. Petr Yan is the man. Bumper sticker coming soon. I'm so hot on Petr Yan. I really hope he wins this one, because I want him to be in a place where I can do a Filthy Casuals guide to Petr Yan, and people are actually hot on it, and it gets hundreds of thousands of hits. Petr Yan is just boxer, wrestler in MMA, done perfect. Moves forward, has that very old school boxing stance with the lead shoulder high. You know, the one that Jessica Ai was trying and then immediately abandoned when she started throwing her chin up in the air as she threw her right hand against Caitlin Chikagian. But Petr Yan actually does it, you know, a high lead shoulder, keep your chin down, tuck behind it, so that you can have your lead hand forward a bit more, and that's how he fights, and it's very cool to watch him sort of cut the cage on people. And every fight that I've watched him in, I've got in going, yeah, Petr Yan, he's a pressure dude, he's going to pressure the shit out of this dude. And then for the first round, I'm going, he's not really doing much. If he doesn't pick it up soon, this guy's not going to get tired. And then he does. It's just, every time I see him, I go, I don't think he's doing enough pressuring here. And then it turns out to be enough pressuring. If you watched him beat up John Dodson, that was great fun, because John Dodson has made a fool out of people like Pedro Munoz by running out the side door and pumping arm punches. And Petr Yan was like, no, that's not going to work on me. Petr Yan was cutting him off with nice body kicks and things. If there's one thing about Petr Yan's style I'd like to see more of, it's kicking, because he does well doing it, but he seems to be a little bit too cautious of being taken down off it. Especially if you go low kicks, and especially if the opponent's circling on the fence and you go like inside low kick on the trailing leg. That's a great way to just sort of hold someone in place and bring you, you know, your clashed legs are going to bring you down on top of them with your punches. But a very good combination puncher, sort of holds himself back, you know, like when you say combination puncher you expect lots of combinations, but he really does sort of slowly trickle them in. You know, it picks up through the rounds, but like I said, round one sometimes he just does nothing, and it's very strange. Has good success with like that left hook, right straight, left straight, which is a really cool combination that you should steal, because basically the left hook serves as a slap, which, you know, brings the opponent's guard up, but wide, and then you shoot the right straight down the center and you push them away with the left straight, the jab. So basically you're going left hook to get the guard up, right straight is the one you want to land, and then the jab is just to stiff arm them back out to range, basically. Now what's interesting about Yan, obviously, is that the pressure he puts on, it makes people not want to strike with him, and it makes them want to go to the wrestling, but obviously he knows that they're going to go to the wrestling because his whole thing is that he's a boxer and he's pressuring them. So I'm very intrigued to see how Jimmy Rivera can, you know, this is assuming that Jimmy Rivera doesn't bring out some amazing ring craft where he escapes easily off the fence every time. But I would assume Jimmy Rivera is going to have to either, one, fight back from bad cage position, or two, try and make a wrestling match of it at points, and then, you know, grab a clinch, maybe try and turn Yan onto the fence. And then, you know, if you were saying like you want to stay striking against Yan, you don't want to wrestle because he's going to be ready for wrestling, he's quite hard to take down, I'd say try and get clinches, turn him, and then try and elbow him either on the break or push him to the fence, free arms, and then elbow him there. Or knee. You know, what I'd want to see from Jimmy Rivera is not trying to point fight / kickbox this, and really try and use all his skills to actually get some hurt onto Yan, because Yan has a fucking hard head, and he's quite defensively sound for someone who moves forward all the time. And, you know, you don't want to lose the first round and then say, uh-oh, I'm getting a bit tired, now I better switch up my strategy. But I don't really know. I don't really know what to expect from Rivera. I just can't see him doing like a dancey kickbox fight here. I think Petr Yan's ring pressure is too good. I mean, it's like we were saying with, you know, there are levels to, I fucking hate that phrase, but there are levels to ring craft, and Holly Holm sidestepping Ronda Rousey, who's just running at her, is not as impressive as Lyoto Machida changing directions and getting out from the cage against like Chris Weidman, who's cutting the cage really well. Petr Yan did easily cut the cage on people like D'Andrade. What was his name? Douglas D'Andrade, yeah. But he also did it to John Dodson, who is, as much as you hate him, the thing that's frustrating about him is that he can always just slide out one side. I don't think I've seen Jimmy Rivera in against anyone who cuts the ring so well and does so much useful stuff off it. So I know that I said Lamas versus Kattar could be low-key fight of the night. Rivera versus Petr Yan, low-key fight of the night. People's main event, Tony Ferguson versus Donald Cerrone. Wow, we're peaking really early in this broadcast. It's Rivera, Yan, yes, and then it's Ferguson, Cerrone, yes, and then it's sort of like, just keep the TV on in the background after that. Love this fight. Did a big Patreon piece for the Patreon boys about it. It's interesting because Tony Ferguson, his standard style of just mad pressure matches up with Donald Cerrone's greatest weakness. Donald Cerrone, I've watched that Iaquinta fight like 4 times now, and I'm still thinking it's probably because Iaquinta's boxing isn't as great as everyone says. He doesn't really move his head. He has his hands down by his chest, like he does both hands in front of his chest and has his head projected forward, and he's like waiting to slip punches but doesn't. But the thing is that Donald Cerrone's jab did look very good in that fight. It's this whole thing of like, quite hard to gauge how good something is if you're not doing it against someone who knows how to deal with it. I did watch some footage of him sparring with Joe Schilling. I included that in the article, actually, but he's been working with Joe Schilling for a little while, and there's some real shades of Joe Schilling coming into him now, because if you watch Cerrone back in WEC, it's like sprint into low kick. That's the whole game plan. And he's gradually added more and more elements, and it's great, because with fighting so often, you can really see when these things start coming in and start becoming more of his, like, favourite method. But I've never seen him look more like Schilling than he did in that Iaquinta fight, because Schilling does an awful lot of feinting, flapping his hands around to frustrate people, slapping at your guard and then jabbing you. Schilling's whole thing was like throw a front kick or a round kick and then pick up the knee and then step forward with punches. You know, the knee pumps were constant with Schilling, and it really threw off very good both kickboxers and Nang Muay, because you're hitting them with these annoying, needly little techniques and making them expect stuff. And at no point was he like throwing huge round kicks and just murdering dudes with them. He was just constantly playing with expectations and doing it at a very high pace, especially for a smoker. In fact, you know, his style reminded me, or rather, Pech Moricot's style reminded me a little bit of Joe Schilling when I was watching his fight with Sanshai. You know, it's just show him the knees. They're coming at him, but you're not actually doing it. You're just stepping forward. And then you're throwing these long, snappy, flicky straight punches, and his head's just getting snapped back as he's trying to deal with the front kicks that he thinks are coming and they're not. And Cerrone's footwork, again, like, you really can't gauge this shit unless you're dealing... Your defensive ringcraft against people with bad offensive ringcraft is not great defensive ringcraft. I was watching him, he did a couple of slick sidesteps against Iaquinta, but Iaquinta provided almost no pressure. Moving forward once every, 2 minutes, in a straight, just going, okay, now I'm going to get in. That's not pressure. Pressure is moving forward constantly closing that distance just enough to make the opponent feel uncomfortable, and saying, hey, I'm going to keep doing this, and making them sprint for openings or throw back at bad times with, when they shouldn't be throwing back and you counter them. That's pressure, making people worry constantly. And the pressure of a good pressure fighter is more tiring than the actual punches they're throwing. I said it ages ago in an article, and I thought it was a good quote, so I keep using it, but pressure is the fear of the punches. It's not just the punches. I can't remember the actual quote, but it was something like that. And Tony Ferguson does that very well, both by staying very active so that the punches are always coming, but also, if you watch his fight with Pettis, and the Barbosa fight less so, he's more sprinting at him, the Thompson fight a little bit, but, the Kevin Lee fight showed that he can fight a little bit more cautiously. He's aware of not just running in on people, but the Pettis fight was really good because it looked like he was running Pettis ragged, but if you watched it closely, he's not sprinting himself into exchanges with Pettis. He's just constantly moving Pettis back and being at a good striking range that's uncomfortable for Pettis. And I think that's very important in this fight, because the difference between pressure and just running for it are the difference between Donald Cerrone's intercepting knee murdering you and Donald Cerrone's intercepting knee not really being a big deal. If you watch, Donald Cerrone tries to intercept Darren Till with the knee. Darren Till's too close, too long, just hits him in the face while he's on one leg. Cerrone didn't land a single intercepting knee on Jorge Masvidal because Masvidal wasn't, like bursting trying to get in. Masvidal just kept sort of stepping back into a tighter range that Donald Cerrone wasn't comfortable with, and then he'd flick a jab up the middle. That's pressure, and that, it was very different sort of pressure to Tony Ferguson, but that's still pressure. Jim Miller, Evan Dunham, people like that running to try and get in on Cerrone and swing at him. That's not pressure, but that does make you just an absolute mark for the intercepting knee. Alexander Hernandez was just out of range, and then he'd sprint in and try and hit Donald Cerrone a couple of times. And by the time Cerrone got his timing down, it was just eating a knee every time he stepped in. Because he came from such a far out distance, it was just a telegraph, basically. So if Ferguson applies pressure like he did against Pettis and stays up in his face, that's hard work for Donald Cerrone. And that's when he's either got to use footwork that he hasn't really shown that much, change directions, get out the side door, and do it frequently. Doing it once is not enough. Or he has to find weapons that he can hurt Ferguson with while Ferguson's in front of him. Now, one of the times that Ferguson's very hittable, and Duke Roufus was calling this out on TV in front of the world, so everyone should know it now, but Ferguson is very hittable off his kicks. He steps up into these super hard low kicks, often into the shin. He's just a madman. I suppose that's kicking metal pipes for you. But steps up into these low kicks, and then his hands are like down by his chest, and he's always able to be hit there. Josh Thompson got him there. Edson Barboza got him there. Anthony Pettis dropped him off like a clash of legs. And I think Donald Cerrone could benefit from using the cross check. The lead leg comes up and checks across the body. That is, firstly, a great way to come down with the right hand afterwards. Secondly, it also blocks the front kick, which, if you watch Badr Hari versus Semi Schilt, that's how he dealt with the front kick, because the big problem with Schilt is he's either going to front kick you or round kick you with the lead leg, and you don't know which. And if you're picking up your right leg to check a round kick, the kick's still going to come in. If you're taking the round kick on your arm, the front kick's still going to go inside your elbow. By picking up that left leg and really committing to the cross check, he was able to make sure that the kick didn't get through. And I forgot to mention, Ferguson, front kicks a fucking lot. If you've watched any Ferguson fights, he looks like he just hates his opponent's midsection. He really goes for it, and people don't really talk about it much, which is weird. I suppose it's like Henry Cejudo headbutting people. It happens all the time, but people just aren't conditioned to look for it. So catching him off kicks, checking kicks and coming back. The front kick, I think that's one of the areas where like a more traditional kickboxing style can be brought to lever against Tony Ferguson. If you can get him front kicking and parry it across his body and then come back with a nice punch low kick combination, I think that's the sort of stuff where Cerrone can start getting ahead. Ferguson, really good jab, which from both stances, which is problematic for Donald Cerrone because straight hitting is what gets his plums. He tends to get in, like if someone gets inside of his range, like his comfortable hitting range, he tends to start looping punches back at them, and then the straights come down the centre and just, fuck him up. Ferguson throws straights from down by his chest and has his chin up in the air, and he's gonna get really badly hurt at some point, but right now it's working, and people don't seem to be able to answer it. Another area that Ferguson is kind of in if you throw a kick at Ferguson, he tends to then come back in like clockwork. He lets it fall short, comes back in, and Pettis was really falling for that. But I think if you do like a kick, punch, kick sort of combination, Pettis doesn't start combinations with kicks, he ends combinations with kicks when he throws combinations. I think if you do that, you've got a good chance of catching Tony coming back in, which is good because Cerrone does start some combinations with like an inside low kick and then goes high with the kick, or inside low kick, jab, cross, right kick. Well, the things like that are the things that I think you've got a good chance of getting off against Tony Ferguson. One of the interesting things about the two of them is their reaction to sort of hitting a wall on the feet. When Tony Ferguson's having trouble on the feet, he does something like roll for an Imanari roll, gets in on a leg, does something crazy. And that's both when he's like not having success on the feet, he'll just mix it up, but also when he's hurt, he'll just start rolling and shit. And it looks bizarre, and I don't want to advertise it as like the answer to all problems if you're rocked, but one of the great things about it is that if he rolls underneath you and gets a leg, it's very hard to keep hitting someone and worry about leg entanglements and things like that, because the knee, even if you're not able to attack a heel hook or something like that, you reap someone's knee, they have to turn away from you, and they're not able to hit you in that position. They have to get their leg out and do something different. So leg entanglements work well. I was talking about this in my Marlon Moraes versus Henry Cejudo article. Marlon Moraes, both times he got taken down in the UFC were off kicks. He immediately dived underneath John Dodson's legs and entangled the leg, because it really stops their momentum and it makes them defend while you're on the bottom. That was, part of Danaher's philosophy, and part of why Marcelo Garcia had so much success with the single leg X position is that it's very easy to entangle a leg from bottom position because you've got both feet there ready to work, compared to top position where, you have to sit back from like a guard pass or something. But the other thing about the Tony Ferguson thing is that, like, if you stick to him and you try and keep a hold of him as he rolls, you got a great chance of being, like, projected over top of him with the Granby roll. So it's a really good way of dealing with that sort of stuff. But, Donald Cerrone's answer to, like, hitting a wall on the feet is to duck his head and try and take people down. And if he times it when you step in, well, he can get it. And he surprises people with takedowns like Kote and people like that. But if you know that he's not succeeding on the feet and you're keeping your distance well, or you're managing the exchanges well, it just comes across as like a really bad shot. Like, if you watch his shot at Leon Edwards or against Mike Perry, it's really not good. Just sort of like duck the head and run in. And this is the interesting thing. Tony Ferguson is not going to like snap Donald Cerrone down in an exchange like Lando Venata or Gleison Tebow. Guys who are shorter than him, he can just snap them down and grab their head or drag them into a front headlock on the mat and go to their back as he did to Tebow. Where he might catch Donald Cerrone is coming in on a bad shot. If you keep up the pressure on Donald Cerrone, he's almost guaranteed to shoot. And Tony Ferguson... Donald Ferrone is what I always called him there. Tony Ferguson is very, very good at countering bad shots with front headlock work. I mean, ultimately, that's an awful lot of talk to say, this is like Rivera in the Yan fight. He's going to have... There is a question being asked of Cerrone here, and how he answers that will tell us how the fight goes. It's not so much the case of, like, how can Tony Ferguson deal with Donald Cerrone's running low kick combinations, because if Tony Ferguson does what Tony Ferguson normally does, even if it gets ugly, running combinations into low kicks against a retreating opponent is not really a thing for Cerrone. It's going to be working against someone coming forward. The worst thing you can do against Don Cerrone is what Jeremy Stevens did, which is start backing up when he shows you his hands, because he'll just sprint into a low kick. Anyway, Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Eye. Don't really care about this. I don't care about this. You didn't come here to hear me say anything about this, but looking at Ai's last couple of fights, she does leave her chin up there on a platter. But that was the case with Priscilla Cachoeira. They picked her so that she could get check hooked into oblivion, and then Valentina Shevchenko was like, better take her down to be safe. Yeah, I mean, Jessica Ai's thing has been just sort of like keeping up a pace, being aggressive, landing punches that don't really matter. Whereas Valentina Shevchenko's thing has been lowering the pace, keeping the distance, landing occasional punches that don't really matter. I don't know, maybe expect some takedowns from Valentina. If she finishes her, which, being honest, looking at Jessica Ai's striking and knowing what Valentina Shevchenko's best strikes are, she should have a good chance of hurting her with strikes. But if she does, people are going to go ape shit like, Jack, I told you she'd finish someone eventually. Oh dear, I would love it if Jessica Ai won this one. It would be absolutely hilarious, because that'd be strawweight champion, unattractive butch lesbian, in your opinion, not mine. Featherweight division, dead. Bantamweight division, Amanda Nunes, again. Valentina Shevchenko, sort of like the only marketable one in the traditional UFC sense of marketable. And if she loses Jessica Ai, not a bad looking lass, but very, very boring. But then, Valentina Shevchenko's boring and people don't really notice. They just go like, I can't wait for her next fight. Do you remember her last fight? Nah, but I can't wait for the next one. Henry Cejudo versus Marlon Moraes. I mean, I wrote a big article on this one. I think this is fascinating because Henry Cejudo has fought like 5 southpaws or switch hitters in a row. And I've seen him switch his stance to stay on open guard. But I don't know if he will against a guy who's full-time orthodox. And if he doesn't, then suddenly that body kick he's been leaning on for like his last 5 fights is gone. That spiraling off to the open side is gone, and he's going to have to do something different, which is fascinating. Meanwhile, Marlon Moraes, how comfortably are you going to be able to kick against a guy who is ridiculously good as a wrestler? Again, Marlon Moraes' only 2 takedowns scored on him in the UFC came off-court kicks, just like running through them. I think that's the big thing for Cejudo. If you get the takedown off a kick, you've got to drop on him as soon as possible. And I think, it's good that Cejudo is adaptive in his grappling. He passed guard immediately on Sergio Pettis, but as soon as he got on top of DJ in their second fight, he immediately turked a leg and just kept his hips heavy on it, because he knew that DJ was trying to get a butterfly hook in and to elevate him. So he'll probably keep an eye on getting his legs reaped or entangled, taking Moraes down here. Moraes' boxing improvements in like the last few years have been pretty incredible to me. I mean, obviously he was sort of one of those guys who came in with so much hype that people just aren't surprised that his boxing's got so good, but it really has improved over the last few years. It wasn't that good when he was in World Series of Fighting. Double jabs, feints, and then steps in again afterwards. He's really got a good eye for, like, if you compare him to, say, his teammate or a longtime teammate, Edson Barbosa, one of them really learns their opponent much better than the other, and it's not Barbosa. Barbosa has like a set list of tricks that he goes through, whereas Marlon Moraes looks at people and adapts what he does through the rounds. I wrote a huge article on this, and I did a Filthy Casual's Guide to Henry Cejudo. I don't want to repeat myself and make those redundant, so go and read those or watch those, and you'll get my full opinions on it. We're a little bit over time now. I did have some questions written down ready to answer, but I got too excited about Ricardo Lamas versus Calvin Kattar. Said no one except me. I'm your boy Jack Slack. I am now fully independent, working with articles and stuff on my own site. Go check out thefightprimer.com. If you want to support my podcast or my writing, sign up to the Patreon, get extra stuff every week. If you want to send an email to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. If a check hook is thrown and the opponent isn't there, does it cease to be a check hook?